Welcome to the Storm Surf Video Surf Forecast for Sunday, March 16th. Brought to you by Vunabaka.com, a new residential community on the island of Fiji in close proximity to great surfing. Our first stop on the tour is significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. Notice a gale low in the northern dateline region producing 32-foot seas. Otherwise, seas and swell associated with a gale previously off the coast of California is impacting the coast. Decent sized surf hitting central California this Sunday evening, 18 to 20 foot Hawaiian at select spots. Also, wind swell pushing into the northern Hawaiian Islands. Kind of blustery conditions though. And of biggest notice, a big calm area. No seas of interest right over the dateline in the central North Pacific associated with high pressure. First, we'll take a look at the jet stream level winds. These are winds up about 32,000 feet. They direct the storm track and also help fuel storm development down at the ocean surface and in lower levels of the atmosphere. Today we have a pocket of winds in the 160, 170 knot range pushing off Japan, about where it's been all year, about 30 north. But ridging kind of to the north with a big split point right on the dateline. This is definitely a retrograde from previous activity. Anyway, the northern part of the jet stream is heading up into northern Canada. The southern branch goes south of Hawaii and then splits again, part of it going up into the northern northwest states and the rest sort of heading down across the equator region. No real troughs of interest other than right here, and it's not a particularly well-formed trough, but that is supporting some degree of low-pressure development. Otherwise, this split here splits typically support high pressure at the surface, and that's pretty much what we're going to see. Let's put this into motion. Moving out the next couple of days, and the trough continues off of Kamchatka. This is actually a new trough. But wind speeds are really weakening down to 130 knots, and even this region looks to be splitting, and east of there it's basically a mess. There's nothing really going on, nothing to support gale or storm development. We put this into motion. By the time you get into Wednesday, you still have a bit of a trough here, but there's no real winds, nothing to support it. Basically a split flow, parallel split flow coming off of Asia. The southern branch goes pretty much flat right across the Pacific into southern California. The northern branch meanders all over the place, and really there's just nothing here to support storm or gale development. Keep putting that into motion. The split gets even more pronounced. Now the split's it's back to 155 east. I mean, it might as well be right over Japan. All this supports high pressure at the surface in between the split flows. Little bit of a maybe trough trying to get going here by Friday. Put that into motion, and sure enough, you actually get what looks to be a Gulf trough by the weekend, if this is believable. This is kind of typical. You get a split, and then the northern branch will go up through the Bering Sea, and often it'll drop down into Gulf of Alaska, or even maybe the eastern Gulf and form a backdoor sort of a trough front pushing down the U.S. West Coast. You can get some cold air and some good snow set up in higher elevations, but we're not sure that's necessarily going to happen. Anyway, this trough continues Sunday into the Gulf. Maybe good for a small gale or something, but it almost is cut off at this point in time. Then we're 180 hours out. That's actually the best looking system for the whole week, so something to keep in mind. Next, let's take a look at what's going on lower levels of the atmosphere. Again, the jet stream supports formation in the upper levels of the atmosphere, but this is the ground truth in terms of storm production and swell production. Winds blowing on the ocean surface are what create waves, and so that's what we're looking for. Sure enough, in the northern Gulf here, or the northern dateline region, 40 knot west winds projected or modeled at least, and that is supporting some sort of swell production there. 32-foot seas we saw on the earlier slide. Otherwise, it looks like pretty much wind swell northeast I don't know if you'd call them trades. It's more, but I guess it is. It's because it's all driven by high pressure, but there's also a little cutoff low here. So northeast winds blowing over the islands, good for wind swell. Along California coast, it depicts a rather calm wind flow, but the reality is winds are blowing pretty good along central California coast, probably 15 knots. Anyway, we'll put this into motion, see how it plays out. The gale in the northern dateline disappears. Cutoff low here northeast of Hawaii continues. A new gale develops on Monday. We'll pull this back just a little bit. Actually, it was in play as of Sunday evening. 40-knot winds, basically aimed best towards Hawaii. Great circle tracks, about 306 degrees. But notice how it kind of 40-knot winds, but it's lifting northeast pretty fast. But then it gets a little bit of development and a second system behind that. Again, 45-knot winds, 307 degree path into Hawaii. Pretty good long ways away. We'll put this is by Wednesday. And that system, too, follows a similar route. 45-knot winds out of the west. All this is good for some degree of swell into Hawaii. There is about 320 degree path. But relative to, let's say, northern California, the issue is the 308 degree path here is about as far as you're going to get before you run into the Aleutians here. But this is all south of that, so maybe good down something 304 degrees or so. Also notice a little gradient off of California by Thursday. That's good for local wind swell, but not really looking forward to that. Rather see more long period surf and swell. And yet a third gale develops late Friday, 45-knot winds. Pushes and sort of short-lived relative to Hawaii. Again, 302 degree path. So good. All this is looking good for Hawaii to get a little background energy and less for the U.S. West Coast. Then this cutoff low, or this low starts forming in the trough in the Gulf of Alaska. 35-knot winds. Nothing particularly strong. We're into, here we're out 180 hours, so it's kind of just a wild guess whether it'll actually form at all, but by late Sunday, 35-knot winds. That's probably good for 12 or 13 second period swell moving into central California and select breaks in southern California down into Baja maybe. Let's take a look at the significant wave height charts and see if that all bears out. So here we are today, again, 32-foot seas in the northern dateline region. Relative to northern California, that's energy on about the 306 degree path. To Hawaii, not so much. It's kind of cutting more across, was about 328 or so. Actually, let's put this back just a little bit. Relative to Hawaii, there you go. Now we're into Saturday night. Still not, most of the energy is cutting across the paths relative to Hawaii, but I'm sure sideband swell will push down into there. So let's put this into motion. That one fades out pretty quick. Here's your cutoff low relative to Hawaii. 20-foot seas on Monday morning. Good for maybe some 13-second period northeast energy, but I think winds will be pretty not favorable at the same time. Here's the second gale coming off Japan on Monday. You get, what is that, 24, 25-foot seas into Hawaii. Pretty good down about the 316 degree path. That's good for probably 14-second period swell, which is okay. And that actually, look at that, it blows up a little bit by this time, though. You're into Wednesday, and it looks like it's all aimed more west to east. That would favor northern California, sure enough, up the, what is that, about 298 degree path or so, 296. So that's not horrible, but it's not big, and it's kind of far away, and it fades out pretty fast. And yet another system behind that, supposedly 36-foot seas on Thursday. Again, a little bit at Hawaii, more aimed up the pass towards California, but a long ways away. And that continues, fades out, and yet another system. So this is kind of a productive little pocket here. and that continues into Saturday, and then here comes the low in the Gulf. What do you got? 22-foot seas. That's about 13-second period energy, assuming it forms at all, and we're 180 hours out. So that's, well, let's see. I'm just looking for the weekend. No, it's into Sunday morning, Saturday night when it's forming. So nothing will be able to hit into California for the weekend, and most of it looks to be east of the pass to Hawaii. So this will be a week beyond if it forms at all. So a reasonably active period pattern, but nothing strong. Just sort of more utility class swell, something to ride for the islands and the U.S. West Coast, which is certainly better than nothing. Next, let's take a look at long-term indicators. Month, 2 months, 3 months out, 6 months out. Get a sense of what's coming. We've been talking about Kelvin waves and westerly wind bursts and all the precursors for El Nino, so let's see how that situation is progressing. Southern Oscillation Index, first up on our menu. Daily average, 25.42. 30-day average, minus 8.65. And almost right at zero for the 90-day average. Negative numbers tend to suggest the active phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation, also possibly suggestive of El Nino if the negative numbers go for months on end. Right now, if we're just basically at about a month's worth of negative numbers here, certainly pulling the 30-day average down into a much better place, and actually pulling the 90-day average down too. So long term, this suggests basically a neutral pattern. All the rest of this suggests the active phase of the MJO, and that is supportive of storm development in the northern hemisphere in the winter. Here's the same set of data, 30-day average, but mapped out over the past 2 years. Notice here back July 2012, we actually thought we were moving into an El Nino, but it quickly evaporated. Got into last summer, and we were clearly in like a mini La Nina state. And now notice we've had a precipitous drop in the Southern Oscillation Index. It's been going on for moving into 3 months now. This is all good news. We're out of positive territory, back into weekly negative territory, but that all tends to be more favorable for storm development. The downside is we're late in the winter season, and it might not make a whole lot of a difference. But if it continues, that tends to provide not as much of a direct support in the southern hemisphere for storm development, but some support. So perhaps this is something to help put a little something into the long-term summer outlook, a little more energy or something. Next, we take a look at surface level wind anomalies. These are variations from normal for this time of year. We're looking at the West Pacific, the Philippines here, Australia here. As of today, the anomalies are pretty neutral over the maritime continent, but there are weak westerly anomalies over the dateline region, and those weak westerly anomalies continue south of Hawaii, and then we go back to this sort of weak easterly anomalies beyond there. So you have this sort of westward push up to and over the dateline, eastward push on the other side with like a convergence zone sitting right here, though it's not a clearly defined convergence zone. So this is suggestive of the active phase of the MJO in this portion of the ocean, which is about right. It's weak, but it's there. And then pretty much nothing going on here, neutral if anything. And really the region we're most concerned with is about 3 degrees either side of the equator, and specifically in the West Pacific from about 150 to 160, this region here, because this is the prime region for the development of Kelvin waves, especially if you have prolonged westerly wind bursts or westerly winds. The stronger the better. This transports warm water east and is supportive of El Nino development if it happens over a prolonged period of time and strong enough. Right now we're approaching that point, but there's still a long ways to go. You got to get the whole way through the summer, and we're not there yet. So right now it's more of a teaser, but it's a very, very solid teaser, and we'll get into that in just a little bit more. A week out, the models are again predicting kind of a neutral, weak westerly situation over the maritime continent, but then you get into strong westerly anomalies over the dateline. This is beginning to look like a westerly wind burst, a third one, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a minute. If it holds true, there's much debate about whether that will bear out or not. Anyway, and then you get over the dateline, westerly anomalies again till about this 160 line. That seems to be the split point. Notice easterly anomalies build there. So that these easterly anomalies would be supportive of some sort of upwelling and cooler water over this portion of the Pacific, where the westerly anomalies would be supportive of warmer downwelling water and perhaps a Kelvin wave or another Kelvin wave if this were to continue for a week or more. Here's another way to look at the same data but with some history. Time on this scale and on this scale position. So the West Pacific is roughly starting about here, going, and then dateline here, and then the East Pacific over here. The interesting part, this block of westerly anomalies, these are west winds, the reds and purples are westerly anomalies, the blues are easterly anomalies. Notice this prolonged from February 16th through till about March 8th or 9th. And very strong, again, off the chart or to the top of the chart in terms of strength. This was the second westerly wind burst of the year. There was one in January, one in February, and now the interesting part is the models are suggesting yet a third one starting right now, if anything, and building into this week. So this is certainly something we'll be watching. Again, this would support yet more warm water being transported east, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So here's sort of the rub in the outlook. Two different models. We'll get into one. This is the statistic model. Notice, and the blues are what we call the active phase of the MJO, typically westerly anomalies if it was over the West Pacific. Easterly anomalies or high pressure, clear air is the reds and the oranges. The statistic model suggests over the next 2 weeks that the inactive phase of the MJO is to set up and basically lock down the dateline region. The interesting converse view of this is the dynamic model is suggesting yes, in fact, the inactive phase of the MJO tries to make a little headway, stalls about 5 days out, and lo and behold, a weak version of the active phase of the MJO returns to the dateline, starting about 6-7 days out and going for a week or more. This is certainly the preferred option compared to this. But notice both models diametrically opposed from one another, so who knows how it's going to play out, though I would tend to favor the dynamic model just because what's going on right now appears to be not quite a normal pattern. The statistic model is based on analog years previous situations, and if everything was normal, I'd say yeah, it's completely normal that the inactive phase follows a strong active phase, but then it's certainly not normal to have 2 going on 3 westerly wind bursts right in a row. So I suspect the dynamic model has a better handle on things, but that could be wrong too. Long-term upper level model back online this week. It shows the active phase. The greens are the active phase, or it's really jet stream level, but supportive of precipitation, which tends to be more linked to the active phase. The oranges are the inactive phase. So long-term, it's looking at the active phase of the MJO moving east into Central America by the end of March, with some sort of very, very weak inactive phase setting up right behind it, not lasting very long, pushing into Central America by about the 15th of April, and then kind of a weak pattern behind, but slightly active by, we're looking at the end of April. So interesting to see. Who knows how that's going to play out. I wouldn't trust any model that's going 40 days out. Next, a quick look at sea surface temperature anomalies. What you want to see if you're into an El Nino is warm water building up in this region. Again, just a couple of degrees either side of the equator, anywhere from here the whole way out to here. It's the prime area, and roughly right in here is what they call the Nino 3.4 region. Cool water there right now. This cool water is actually less cool than it was weeks ago, and appears to be eroding. A large area of warm water north of the equator, and just barely so, and another large area here pushing into the U.S. West Coast. Notice this entire area is locked down by warm water now, and it has been making southward progress across the equator. Also pockets of little bits of warm water starting to show up off of Peru, Ecuador, South America. Nothing particularly remarkable, but what is kind of interesting is there is no real cold flow coming up along the coast and gurgling along and making its way west. Really, warm water is starting to take hold along, over the Galapagos and cutting off the cold upwelling off of Peru. Don't know whether that's going to hold or not, but it is somewhat interesting and certainly bears watching. Otherwise, there was a cool pool. We watched it all winter, migrating off California towards the equator, driven by high pressure off the U.S. West Coast. That's been gone for a long time, as ancient history. If a real spring pattern were setting up, you'd expect to see more high pressure building here and maybe some erosion of this warm water. So that's something to look towards right now, but nothing going on there. Also, there's no signs of any like sympathetic cool pool coming off of Africa. When you get a bunch of cool water coming off of Peru in this area and here, a lot of times you'll see a similar teleconnected sort of flow off of Africa. That's not happening, so this is all kind of interesting. Here's another view of the same thing. Again, this is so the date line's here, and you're almost into Central South America when you're on this side of the chart, and it's basically showing there's the neutral line. Little bit cooler waters north of that line. We're down into anywhere from 5 to maybe 2 degrees south, and then generally neutral water north of that line, or if not, up to half a degree warmer. And we've been watching this line continue to work its way south and sort of lock off the equator with at least neutral water, if not slightly warmer water. So that is good news. Next, let's talk about subsurface water temperatures. And here is the really good news is, notice these little X's here. There's a buoy array strung the whole way across the equator, going about 5 degrees either side of the equator from off of Central America the whole way over to the West Pacific. So here we go. Here's the scale. So the date line is here. You're at 100 west here. Okay, and so what this represents is there's a series of buoys, and they have sensors that go down the buoy anchor at predefined depths, 300, 250, about every 50 meters, and then even less every 25 meters on certain buoys in certain locations. The issue here has been all the buoys on in this region here have been down, have not been functional, so we've not been able to get good water temperatures to see what's really going on at depth under the equator. NOAA apparently has a ship down there. It's working its way from east to west. You notice right on the edge here. So this is the 95 array. That is now up. This just started about 2 or 3 days ago. They've also made it to the 110 west array and have that up and running, but there's still this big gap right in here. And they're supposed to work their way and take care of this, but we'll see how that goes. It takes some time, and it sort of depends on the weather and whatever sort of conditions they run into down there, and I'm sure there's supply issues and whatnot as well. So, but the good news is we've got two, and these are the two important ones that we were really concerned with, because there's this supposed pocket of cool air that was sitting, or cool water that was sitting right here. You notice that they're still depicting it here, but it's not nearly as bad as what was previously indicated. Of course, you know, there's 5 degrees above normal water temperature at depth in the central south of Hawaii here. This is a significant Kelvin wave. This is the Kelvin wave that was produced by the first westerly wind burst in January. The second westerly wind burst, no doubt, is feeding yet additional warm water into this Kelvin wave, and it covers a very large area from west of the dateline to about 120 west. But here's kind of the issue. There's no sensors here, so we really don't know if this is valid or not. It's a guesstimate by a model, basically, without any real data. But here is something that's real. There's warm water here at the building in the East Pacific, and likely, even if you were to discount some of this data here, likely being fed by valid warm water that's being noticed but being measured by these sensors here. So it appears there's a current of some kind going and pushing east. So this is classic Kelvin wave setup. It's also the time of year when this sort of thing would happen if an El Nino were starting to form in the, you know, and they tend to be, these would be larger El Ninos, because they typically get going in the February-March time frame, which is exactly how this one has played out. That's not to say that there's any sort of a large El Nino in play. In fact, looking at the water temperatures right now, everything's neutral, if not cool. So this is only potential energy. It is nothing that's real as of yet. But over the next several months, all this warm water is going to start working its way east. It's going to impact the coast of Ecuador. It'll gurgle to the surface and then start getting caught up in the trades and moving back east, and then potentially provide the El Nino signature. But the other assumption is you also need more westerly winds. You need more negative Southern Oscillation Index numbers, etc., etc. So it's just the start. The pattern would need to hold through the summer. So you see we got quite a ways to go, but it's encouraging. It's way better than where we've been for the past 3+ years, and it is somewhat interesting in that it's happening just, what is it, 3 going on 4 years past the last El Nino. So kind of in a little bit close proximity to El Ninos back to back, if this were in fact to turn into El Nino. Anyway, so that's sort of the scenario subsurface. So just to quickly wrap it up, surface temperature wise, still cool water, but there's a whole bunch of warm water lurking right underneath here, pushing this way, hopefully going to make it to Ecuador and then radiate east. So the long-term outlook is looking pretty good. The short term, not so good, but not horrible. Still more surf on the way, and that provides hope for the next week. And long term, it's certainly looking a lot better than it has for the past 3 years, so that's something to be thankful for. And speaking of thanks, we want to thank Vunabaka.com for helping us out, providing us support for this forecast. Check them out at Vunabaka.com. This has been your Sunday surf forecast, video surf forecast. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the comments on the YouTube channel.